Hello muscle car lovers, Ron here. Welcome to Ron's Muscle Car Garage. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Today's video is part 4 of the 568 build, and we're going to talk about rod bolt stretch. Now, rod bolt stretch to me is the only way to go. Now, there is some debate that we only need to torque the rod bolts. Now, in this case, for this 568, I run an ARP 2000 bolt. In either method, either torque or rod bolt stretch, we want to make sure that we lube up the thread on the bolt as well as the surface that the nut has that goes against rod cap. This lubricant allows for stretching of the bolt to happen consistently. As you see here, this is a rod bolt stretch gauge. Basically, it's a micrometer. Each bolt is dimpled on each end so that this micrometer fits in there accurately so that we can measure it. It's one of the only bolts that we can actually measure, so I take full advantage of that rather than trusting a torque wrench. Now, I will use a torque wrench to tighten this down and check this bolt. So this is how I do it. I first of all mic the bolt with the nut on, everything in place, before I've stretched it at all. I get a baseline dimension. So as we tighten the nut, that makes the bolt longer. The nut acts like a jack basically, and it stretches the bolt. The stretch on the bolt is what holds everything together. So I then take half the torque spec per the book, and I torque that rod bolt down, and then I remeasure it with my rod bolt stretch gauge, and I look at the difference. You're going to see about 2 or 3 thousandths at that point, but what you're going to be trying to achieve is what the rod bolt specifications are. So the next thing I do is I torque it just a little bit more, and then I check it once again with the rod bolt stretch gauge. And now I see that it's gotten a little longer yet. I might be at 4 thousandths. So now I'm getting close. I do the same process. I get my torque wrench or breaker bar, whatever you're using, with your socket, and I tighten it a little bit more. I check it. I do this several times until my bolt is the right stretch that I'm desiring. And once I've reached that, I move on to the next, and then to the next, and so on and so on. This is the most accurate way I have found to have consistent rod bolt torque per each bolt. Now, this being said, this is a finding that I have found when I've compared the torque versus stretch. So as I try to stretch to, let's say, that 6 thousandths of an inch, and I've got lubricant on the nuts as well as the thread, I then compare the torque with a torque wrench of how to gain that stretch that I'm looking for. I have found that there's been sometimes 30 foot-pounds of torque difference to make that 6 thousandths stretch happen. In other words, if I would have just used a torque wrench and tightened down all of the rod bolts, click, 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 some of those bolts would not have been stretched as much, and some might have been stretched a little too much. So that's why I'm a total believer in doing it with a rod bolt stretch gauge, because now we can accurately read what the stretch is, and we'll have consistent rod bolt clamping, which is critical on a big block Chevy because the parts are a little heavier. We got big RPM with a bigger cam engine, and we need everything to hold together, and that will assure that of happening so that our engine stays healthy and happy throughout the season. That concludes this video, and I hope you guys have learned something from this. If you're using the torque method, that's fine if you're comfortable with that. For me, I'm just not. But if you have any questions about this, go ahead and leave them in the comments section below, and I'll answer everything. And thanks for watching. And once again, like I always say, keep working on them because they're never done.